At exactly 3:17 a.m., a grieving father receives a voice note from his dead son, whispering, "He is standing behind me now." And when he traces the location to the same washroom where the boy died, he realizes the message isn't a recording at all, it's an invitation. And once you listen, something begins listening back. The first time the voice note arrived, it was exactly 3:17 a.m. The phone vibrating softly on the bedside table as if it were afraid to wake the house. And when the father, still half drunk on grief and sleepless nights, pressed play, he heard his son's voice, thin, familiar, unmistakably his, whispering with the same frightened hitch it used to have during thunderstorms. "He's standing behind me now." And for a moment, the world simply stopped. After slipping in the washroom where the tiles were always damp and the light flickered, no matter how many times the bulb was changed. But the voice carried tiny details. Only a parent would know. The way the boy breathed between words, the soft click of his tongue, the distant drip of water echoing exactly like it used to in that washroom. And when the second night came, and the same vibration woke him at 3:17 a.m. sharp, like bare feet adjusting their stance on a wet floor. The light beneath it off, and when he stood in the hallway listening, the house felt too quiet, as if it were holding its breath. And at exactly 3:17 the following night, the vibration came again. Only this time, when he pressed play, the boy's voice trembled harder, whispering the same words but closer to the microphone. "He is standing behind me now." And right before the message ended, there was a soft, wet sound, like fingers brushing against a mirror, followed by a low, patient chuckle that made the father drop the phone. And as the nights continued, always at 3:17, the messages never changed in words but grew heavier with sound water, dripping faster, tiles creaking, something breathing just out of sync with the boy. And the father began to notice that the mirrors in the house fogged over at night, even when no one was there, especially the washroom mirror, where faint handprints sometimes appeared from the inside as if pressed from behind the glass. Until one night, driven by a need to see, to prove something, each step echoing too loudly. And as he reached the door, he heard the whisper not from the phone but from inside the room itself. His son's voice, terrified and close, saying, "AB, Womir, Piche, Karahai." And behind that voice, so close it seemed pressed to the back of the words, there was another presence, silent and waiting, as if something tall and patient was standing just out of sight. And the father's hand hovered over the doorknob, knowing that whatever had been recording those messages had never left that washroom, knowing that his son's voice was still there every night at 3:17, trapped in the moment of fear, and knowing that the thing standing behind the boy might now be standing behind him too, waiting for him to open the door. And the phone vibrated once more in his palm as if to remind him that the message had not yet finished. The phone vibrated once more in his palm as if to remind him that the message had not yet finished. And with a shaking thumb, he pressed play. Only this time the recording did not end after the whispered words, but continued on in raw, uncut silence broken by faint echoes, the slow drip of water hitting tile, and a breath so close to the microphone it sounded like it was brushing against skin. And then, his son's voice came again. Weaker now, like it was being pulled from deep underwater, repeating, "He is standing behind me now," over and over, each repetition slower than the last, as if something unseen was forcing the words out of him. And suddenly the washroom light flicked on by itself, the bulb buzzing angrily, casting a sickly yellow glow that leaked through the crack under the door. And the father felt a pressure behind his eyes. Memories flooding back of that night, of ignoring the cry, of hearing the thud, and arriving too late. And as he stood frozen, the mirror inside the washroom began to fog rapidly, the glass clouding until a child-sized handprint appeared from the inside. Fingers splayed in panic, sliding downward as if the boy were slipping all over again. And behind that handprint, slowly forming through the mist, was another shape, taller, longer, its head bent at an unnatural angle as though it were trying to fit into the reflection. And the father realized with a sick certainty that the messages were not recordings at all, but moments replaying themselves. Trapped loops of fear sent out every night at the exact second his son had realized he was not alone in that washroom. And when the father finally turned the knob and pushed the door open, the smell of rot and damp air hit him like a wall, the tiles slick under his feet. The mirror completely fogged except for two clear spots where something had been pressing its face close, watching, waiting, and from directly behind him, so close he could feel the cold of it on his neck, came a soft, childlike whisper that did not come from the phone this time but from the air itself, repeating the same sentence with a broken sob, while another breath, deep and satisfied, filled the room. And the clock in the hallway ticked loudly past 3:17 as if mocking him, as if reminding him that this moment had no intention of ending. The father's breath hitched as he felt the cold presence settle closer, the air behind him thickening as though something solid but unseen had stepped into his shadow. And when he forced himself to turn, the washroom mirror cleared just enough to show a reflection that made his knees buckle, because he saw himself standing there with his phone in hand. But behind his reflection was his son, soaked and pale, eyes wide with the same terror from the night he died. And behind the boy stood something that refused to fully appear, a tall, stretched shape whose outline trembled like heat above fire, its face never clear, yet always smiling. And the phone in the father's hand began to play the voice note again on its own, the whisper filling the room while the real child in the mirror mouthed the same words in perfect sync. "He is standing behind me now." And suddenly the father understood that the thing did not hunt bodies. It hunted witnesses, feeding on the moment of fear, replaying it every night, keeping the child trapped as bait. And as this realization struck him, the washroom door slammed shut behind him. The light flickered violently, and the mirror cracked with a sharp snap, splitting the reflection so that the father's image fractured into jagged pieces, while the child's face remained whole, staring straight at him with pleading eyes. And from the broken glass, a wet hand slowly pushed through, fingers bending the wrong way, reaching, not for the father, but for the phone, as if the thing needed the device to keep sending its message. And when the father stumbled back, slipping on the slick tiles, he heard his son cry out for the first time since his death. Not the repeated sentence, but his name, a sound so full of pain and hope that it tore something open inside him. And in that moment he realized that every night at 3:17 the house itself leaned closer to listen, the walls remembering, the drain swallowing whispers, the mirror holding on to what should have passed. And as the tall shape behind the boy shifted, stretching higher, pressing closer to the ceiling, its breath rolled across the father's skin like cold smoke, carrying a promise that if he did nothing, if he turned away, if he survived this night, the voice notes would keep coming, not just to his phone, but to anyone who ever stepped into that washroom. Because some deaths do not end, they echo. And this one had learned how to dial a number. The father clawed backward until his spine hit the cold tiles. His eyes locked on the mirror as the crack widened on its own, spreading like a vein until the glass gave a low groan. And from within that fractured reflection, the tall shape finally leaned forward enough for him to understand why his son had been so afraid, because it had no face of its own, only a smooth, wet surface that reflected fear back at whoever looked at it. And in that surface, the father saw himself as he had been that night, tired, annoyed, turning away when his child called for help, and the thing seemed to swell with satisfaction at that image, feeding on the guilt, while his son's reflection began to pound silently against the glass from the inside, mouth open in a scream that made no sound. and the phone skidded across the floor, stopping near the drain just as another voice note started recording by itself. The red dot blinking, capturing everything, and the father realized in horror that the house was using him now, recording a new witness, a new layer to the loop. And when he tried to crawl toward his son, the tiles beneath his hands felt wrong, soft and warm like skin, the grout lines pulsing faintly as if something beneath the floor was breathing. And the tall shape shifted again, stepping fully behind the boy's reflection, placing its elongated hands on the child's shoulders, in a gesture that almost looked gentle. And then the boy turned his head slowly toward the father, tears of dirty water streaking down his cheeks. And for the first time, the words in the voice note changed, his lips trembling as he whispered, "He won't let me go." And the whisper echoed not just in the washroom, but throughout the house, traveling through pipes and walls, up into the bedrooms, out into the night air, as if the building itself were repeating it. And the father screamed, the sound swallowed instantly by the drain, while the thing behind the boy leaned closer to the mirror, pressing its featureless face against the cracked glass until it began to seep through in thin black lines. And in that moment, the father understood that 317 was not just a time but an opening, a wound that reopened every night. And if he stayed, if he became part of it, his phone would keep vibrating long after he was gone, carrying a voice that was no longer entirely his son's, sent from a washroom that never forgot, to whoever was unlucky enough to answer. The father dragged himself upright using the sink, his hands slipping as the porcelain felt slick and warm. And as he stared into the mirror, he saw the black lines spreading further, crawling out of the cracks like veins. And the thing's reflection began to separate from the glass, peeling forward inch by inch as though the mirror were only a thin skin it had been waiting to shed, while the boy's image flickered, growing faint, his eyes locking onto his father with desperate urgency. And the phone near the drain vibrated violently as a new message sent itself, time-stamped 3:17 a.m. again, even though the clock on the wall had frozen. And from the phone speaker, the boy's voice played back, overlapping with his moving lips in the mirror, creating a horrible echo of present and past collapsing into each other. "He is standing behind me now." And then, layered beneath it, another whisper emerged, lower, closer, using the same voice but wrong, stretched, tasting the words, as if learning how to speak through them. And the father felt a hand rest gently on his shoulder. Too long, too cold, the fingers curving down his chest as if measuring him, claiming him. And when he dared to glance down, he saw wet footprints forming behind him on the tiles, stopping exactly where he stood. And the thing's reflection smiled for the first time, not with a mouth, but by bending the light around it. And suddenly memories not his own flooded his head other nights. Otter, Ponis, other people standing in that same washroom at 3:17, hearing a child cry, ignoring it, answering a vibration until he understood that his son had not been the first and would not be the last, that the house chose moments of neglect and froze them, replaying them until someone stayed long enough to replace the last witness. And as the pressure on his shoulder tightened and the mirror darkened completely, swallowing the boy's reflection, except for his eyes, which remained floating and terrified, the father felt his own voice being pulled from his chest, drawn toward the phone's microphone, shaping itself into a message he did not want to send. While somewhere deep in the pipes, the sound of water rushing grew louder, closer, like footsteps running toward the room, and the vibration in his hand matched the pounding of his heart, sinking him to the house, to the time, to the moment that refused to end. The father tried to scream, but his throat only released a thin hiss as the pressure on his shoulder slid upward to his neck, guiding his head gently, almost lovingly, toward the mirror. And as his eyes met the darkened glass, he saw his own reflection beginning to lag behind his movements by a fraction of a second. Blinking latte, breathing late, smiling when he was not. And behind that delayed reflection stood the tall shape fully now, no longer hiding, its body stitched together from shadows and steam and memories that did not belong in one place, while his son's eyes drifted lower in the glass, as if he were sinking, slowly being pulled down behind the surface, his small hands pressing weakly against the inside, leaving fading marks that slid away and disappeared. And the phone lifted itself from the floor, rising just enough for the microphone to point directly at the father's mouth, as the recording icon blinked steadily, patiently, and he felt words forming without his permission, his lips moving against his will as a voice note captured his breathing, his terror, his regret. And when he finally spoke, it was not his voice alone, but layered with his son's, the sentence reshaping itself as it left him, becoming a warning and an invitation at the same time. While the washroom walls creaked inward slightly, tiles flexing like ribs, the ceiling dripping faster, counting something down, and the mirror rippled as if it were water, swallowing the last clear image of the boy until only darkness remained behind the glass, and the thing leaned closer to the father's ear, its presence filling the room, and whispered with perfect patience, as if it had all the nights in the world, that it only needed him to stay until the message finished sending. Because once the voice was delivered, once someone else listened at 3:17, the house would know where to open next, and the father felt his feet leave the floor just slightly, weights shifting backward, toward the mirror, toward the place where reflections stopped being reflections, while somewhere far away, beyond the walls, another phone vibrated softly in the dark. The father felt himself being pulled backward, inch by inch, his heels scraping uselessly against tiles that now felt like a slow-moving current. And as the mirror rippled wider, it revealed not emptiness behind it, but depth. A narrow version of the washroom stretching endlessly inward, lined with the same cracked tiles and flickering light repeating again and again. And within those reflections, he saw other figures standing frozen at sinks and doors. Other parents, other witnesses, all caught at their own mouths open mid-breath, eyes locked on something behind them. And he realized the thing did not kill. It collected moments, preserving fear like insects in glass, and the phone floated closer to his face as the recording continued, capturing a low sob he didn't remember making. And through the overlapping echoes, he heard his son's voice one last time, no longer frightened, but tired, whispering from deep inside the mirror, asking him why he had anticommissioner, and the question hurt more than the pull, more than the cold hands tightening around his chest. And as his shoulders touched the mirror's surface, it felt warm and yielding like skin, accepting him. And the reflection of the washroom behind him grew sharper while the real room faded. And just before his head passed through, the phone vibrated hard once, sending the completed voice note into the night. And somewhere miles away, a sleeping man stirred as his phone lit up at exactly 3:17 a.m. A new message appearing from an unknown contact, recorded in a washroom that no longer belonged entirely to this world, carrying a child's whisper and an adult's breath layered together, patiently waiting to be played.